The road to Sintra winds through pine forests and eucalyptus groves, and on that particular May afternoon in 1853, it carried a modest carriage containing Antonio Silva and his leather satchel of tools. You must understand, dear listener, that Portugal in those days was awakening from a long slumber, stretching its limbs toward modernity while still wrapped in the comfortable blankets of tradition. The Regeneração had brought new roads and railways, but in places like Sintra, time moved at the pace of moss growing on stone. Antonio shifted his weight, feeling the familiar ache in his left shoulder, a reminder of a scaffold collapse 5 years prior at the Jerónimos monastery. The pain had become his constant companion, more reliable than most people he'd known. Through the carriage window, he watched the quintas pass by, these grand estates where nobility played at rural life while their gardens grew wild with carefully managed abandon. The Quinta das Lágrimas appeared through a grove of ancient oaks, its name, Estate of Tears, carrying the kind of melodrama the Portuguese so cherish. The main house, built in the previous century, displayed the confident yellowish pink that wealthy Portuguese favored, trimmed with white stone around windows and doors. Azulejo tiles depicting mythological scenes adorned the entrance, their blue and white patterns telling stories of gods and heroes who never knew the Portuguese sun. Dom Rodrigo de Menezes awaited in his study, a room that smelled of leather, tobacco, and the peculiar mustiness of old paper. Picture, if you will, a man who had seen the courts of Vienna and Paris, but now found his world shrunk to the size of an estate, his movements limited by joints that protested each step. "Senor Silva," he said, his voice still carrying diplomatic authority despite his body's rebellion. "Your reputation precedes you." Antonio bowed precisely, not too deep, which would seem servile, not too shallow, which would seem presumptuous. 38 years of life had taught him these calibrations. In Italy, he'd learned that marble could be read like a book, but Portuguese nobility required different literacy entirely. The tour of the garden began immediately, Dom Rodrigo leaning heavily on an ebony cane while explaining his collection. 23 marble statues populated the grounds, acquired during his diplomatic years or inherited from ancestors with similar tastes. Gods and goddesses, muses and nymphs, all slowly accumulating the green-gray patina that Portuguese humidity bestows upon neglected marble. Isabel Santos appeared with refreshments, moving with the practiced invisibility of good service. Antonio noticed her eyes, though, quick and intelligent, taking in everything while seeming to see nothing. She couldn't have been more than 24, with hands that showed the daily battle against the estate's dust and disorder. When she set down the tray, her fingers lingered for a moment on a book partially hidden beneath Dom Rodrigo's correspondence. Most servants couldn't read, but Antonio filed away this small observation. Old Joaquim Ferreira joined them in the garden, his face a map of 71 winters, each line earned through decades of coaxing beauty from soil. "The statues have souls, Senor Silva," he announced with the certainty of those who've made peace with their beliefs. "They speak to those who listen." Antonio nodded respectfully. One doesn't argue with the mythology that makes a place function. He'd learned this in Carrara, where the marble cutters swore the stone told them where to strike, and in Lisbon's churches, where stonemasons left tiny marks believing they ensured the building's protection. The garden itself was a testament to accumulated ambition. A French landscape architect's geometric patterns had been softened by 40 years of Portuguese interpretation, creating something between Versailles and wilderness. Box hedges tried to maintain their discipline, while bougainvillea draped itself with Mediterranean abandon. A stream ran through the lower garden, its source somewhere in the Sintra Hills, its destination a pond where carp, old enough to remember Dom Rodrigo's father, circled in eternal meditation. Young Sylvestre, the gardener's apprentice, followed them at a respectful distance. 16 years old and hungry for something beyond trimming hedges, the boy reminded Antonio of himself at that age, before Italy, before the workshops, before Maria's death had taught him that marble outlasts flesh by centuries. "There is one statue," Dom Rodrigo said, pausing dramatically, "that deserves special attention." They walked toward the stream, where a nymph in Carrara marble stood on a small pedestal, her pose suggesting she'd just risen from bathing. The work was competent but not exceptional, likely a workshop piece from the 1700s, when such mythological figures were fashionable garden ornaments. "She weeps," Joachim said simply. "Before the rains come, tears appear on her cheeks. She has done this for 20 years, since the earthquake of 33 cracked the old fountain and we moved her here." Antonio examined the statue with professional interest. The marble showed the usual signs of age, some surface erosion, lichen beginning its slow colonization, but nothing immediately unusual. "Fascinating," he murmured, which was neither agreement nor skepticism. The household assembled for dinner at 8, a formal affair despite only family and the upper servants attending. Father Tomas had arrived, his round face bearing the perpetual slight confusion of a man trying to reconcile his botanical journals with church doctrine. Beatriz de Menezes, Dom Rodrigo's niece, brought youth's energy to the table, her questions dancing just at the edge of propriety. "Uncle says you studied in Italy, Signor Silva. Is it true the Pope has gas lighting now?" Her eyes sparkled with the delight of someone who enjoyed disturbing still waters. Antonio smiled carefully. "The Vatican embraces progress when it serves heaven's purposes, Signora." One might wonder why Antonio chose such diplomatic words. But you see, a craftsman survives by understanding that patrons want their beliefs confirmed, not challenged. His work was to restore stone, not souls. That night, in the small room assigned to him, neither servant quarters nor guest chamber, but something appropriately between, Antonio unpacked his tools. Each chisel and rasp had its history, its purpose. His fingers, thick from years of work, moved over them like a musician checking his instruments. Through the window, moonlight illuminated the garden. The statues stood like frozen courtiers, eternally young, eternally patient. Somewhere among them, a nymph waited to weep, and Antonio found himself curious about her tears. Not because he believed in miraculous statuary, but because stone always had reasons for its behavior. Stone was honest in ways people rarely were. Dawn in Sintra arrives wrapped in mist, and Antonio had already been awake for an hour, studying his notes on marble restoration by candlelight. The shoulder pain was worse in the morning dampness, a barometer more reliable than any instrument. He dressed methodically, working clothes that showed respectability without pretension, and made his way to the garden before the household stirred. The statues emerged from fog, like memories becoming solid. Antonio began his preliminary assessment, notebook in hand, cataloging the damage that time and weather had inflicted. A cherub missing half a wing, a muse whose face had been softened to near featurelessness, a Roman senator whose toga showed the telltale black streaks of pollution carried on rain. Each would require different treatments, different approaches. Stone, like people, demanded individual understanding. Joachim appeared at 7 precisely, carrying pruning shears with the reverence of a priest holding communion wine. "You're early, Senor Silva. The stones wake slowly here." "I find morning light shows truth better than noon," Antonio replied, continuing his measurements. The old gardener watched with suspicion barely concealed beneath courtesy. "You see, dear listener, there are territories in any estate more complex than property lines. Joachim had been keeper of the garden's mysteries for 4 decades. A stranger with Roman dust still on his boots represented possible disruption to carefully maintained order. By 9, the morning routine had established itself. Servants crossed the grounds on their various missions, their paths as predetermined as planets in orbit. Isabel carried linens from the main house, pausing near the fountain where Antonio worked. "Senor Silva, the master asks if you'll take coffee in the blue parlor." But Dom Rodrigo wasn't in the blue parlor. Instead, Antonio found Beatrice there, surrounded by French newspapers and correspondence that she quickly covered with an embroidery hoop. "My uncle is indisposed this morning. His gout, you understand." She smiled with innocent mischief. "Tell me, do you believe in signs and portents?" Antonio set down his coffee cup carefully. "I believe in observation, Senora." "How terribly modern of you. Then you must observe our weeping nymph. Joachim says she'll cry today."
The ants are building their hills higher, and the cats refuse to leave the kitchen. Before Antonio could respond, Father Tomas entered, slightly out of breath, his cassock bearing evidence of a morning walk through dew-laden grass. "Forgive the intrusion. I was examining my barometer, a fascinating instrument, really, and the pressure is dropping remarkably." The priest's enthusiasm for his scientific instruments was poorly hidden beneath attempted nonchalance. One might recognize in him the struggle of an age caught between revelation and reason, each pulling with equal force. By noon, the household had gathered in anticipation. Word spread through that mysterious network that exists in any estate, from kitchen to stable to garden, that the nymph would perform her miracle. Even Dom Rodrigo, despite his swollen foot wrapped in bandages that smelled of Dr. Tavares's peculiar liniments, had himself helped to a chair placed at suitable viewing distance. Antonio positioned himself where he could observe both statue and audience. The marble nymph stood as she had for decades, her surface dry despite the humid air. Joachim stood beside her like a master of ceremonies, occasionally touching the stone with reverent fingers. "Soon," the old gardener announced. "The earth speaks to her first." Silvestre, the apprentice, watched his master with the complex expression of youth witnessing the certainties of age, part reverence, part embarrassment, part hope that such certainties might prove true. The boy caught Antonio's eye and quickly looked away, as if caught in some betrayal. At 12:30, Isabel gasped softly. "Look!" Indeed, moisture had begun to form on the nymph's face. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Tiny droplets that caught the filtered sunlight, running slowly down the marble cheeks like tears of genuine sorrow. The household stood in hushed reverence. Several servants crossed themselves. Father Tomas murmured something that might have been prayer or might have been a notation for his journal. Antonio moved closer, his trained eye taking in details others might miss. The droplets formed primarily on the face and upper torso, less on the arms, none on the base. The pattern suggested something beyond simple condensation. He touched the stone briefly. Cold, definitely cold, despite the warming air.
She weeps for the storm coming, Joachim declared. By tomorrow morning, rain will wash the dust from the world. Dom Rodrigo nodded sagely from his chair. 20 years I've seen this, Senor Silva. Never once has she been wrong. Beatriz stood near her uncle, but her eyes were on Antonio, watching his reaction with the intensity of someone looking for confirmation of suspicions. What do you think, Senor? Does marble have memory? All stone has memory, Senora, Antonio replied carefully. It remembers the sea that made it, the pressure that changed it, the hands that shaped it. This satisfied everyone while committing to nothing, a skill as valuable as any chisel technique. That afternoon, while the household discussed the coming storm, Antonio made detailed sketches of the nymph. He noted the statue's position relative to the stream, the angle of its base, the particular quality of the marble. His fingers found subtle variations in the stone's texture, areas more porous than others. The piece had likely come from a secondary vein in Carrara, where the marble sometimes carried microscopic fissures that made it less suitable for the finest work. Isabel approached while he worked, carrying water flavored with lemon. "You don't believe it's miraculous," she said quietly, not a question but an observation. Antonio looked at her carefully. This was dangerous territory, a servant speaking so directly, him responding as equals. "I believe there's wonder in understanding how things truly work." She smiled slightly. "My grandmother could predict rain by how her joints ached. No one called that a miracle." Before he could respond, she was gone, back to her duties, leaving only the scent of lemon and an impression of intelligence constrained by circumstance. The evening brought clouds building over the Atlantic, though still distant enough that the sunset painted them pink and gold. At dinner, conversation centered on the nymph's prophecy. Dr. Tavares had joined them, his rationalist perspective clashing politely with Joachim's mysticism, while Father Tomas attempted to navigate between both shores. "Atmospheric pressure affects everything," the doctor insisted, cutting his fish with surgical precision. "Even our bodies respond to barometric changes." "The saints work through nature," Father Tomas offered diplomatically. "Science and faith need not quarrel." Dom Rodrigo smiled beneath his gray mustache. "Gentlemen, whether miracle or nature, the result remains. My garden possesses a statue that warns of weather. Is that not wonderful enough?" Thunder woke the household at 4 in the morning, followed by rain that fell like a curtain being drawn across the world. Antonio lay listening to water drumming on terracotta tiles, thinking about porosity and pressure, about stone drinking moisture from earth and air. The shoulder pain had predicted this storm as surely as any weeping statue, but nobody gathered to witness his joints' prophecy. By dawn, the rain had softened to steady persistence. The garden transformed into a different country. Paths became streams, flower beds became ponds, and the statues stood like martyrs enduring their trials. Antonio dressed and ventured out despite the weather, his oilcloth cape a poor shield against Portuguese rain that seemed to come from all directions simultaneously. The nymph stood in her usual place, now genuinely wet, indistinguishable from her sisters in the garden's marble population. But Antonio noticed something curious. The ground around her pedestal was slightly depressed, as if the earth here held more water than elsewhere. He knelt, ignoring the mud soaking through his trousers, and pressed his hand into the soil. Saturated, yes, but more than that. There was a sense of flow beneath, subtle but present. Joachim appeared like an apparition through the rain, carrying an umbrella that had seen better decades. "She told us true, didn't she, Senor?" "Indeed she did," Antonio agreed, rising carefully. His shoulder protested the movement. The old gardener studied him with eyes that had watched seasons turn for 7 decades. You're looking for explanations, but some things simply are, like love or sorrow, or the way light falls through leaves. Inside the main house, chaos reigned politely. Water had found its way through a window left open in the yellow salon, and servants scurried with buckets and cloths. Isabel directed the younger maids with quiet efficiency, her competence obvious despite her youth. When she saw Antonio dripping in the entrance hall, she wordlessly handed him a towel that appeared from nowhere, the mark of excellent service. "The master requests your presence in the library when you're less aquatic," she said, allowing herself the smallest smile. The library occupied the entire eastern wing's second floor, a cave of books that Don Rodrigo had accumulated like sediment over decades. The old diplomat sat near the window, his gouty foot elevated, watching rain slash against glass. "Ah, Silva, come see what the storm has given us." On the table before him lay an old leather portfolio, water-stained but intact. "This morning's wind knocked over a stack of documents I'd been meaning to sort for years." Look what emerged. The original plans for the garden's renovation. Antonio examined the papers carefully. Dated 1820, they bore the signature of Jean-Baptiste Moreau, described as architecte paysagiste. The drawings showed elaborate water features, underground channels, a complex system of drainage and irrigation that would have been revolutionary for its time. Detailed notes in French describe something called circulation souterraine, underground circulation. "My father hired him after visiting Versailles," Don Rodrigo explained. "Cost a fortune and took 3 years. But half the system was never completed. The French wars, you understand, economics. Moreau fled when the liberals started fighting the absolutists." Antonio traced the planned water channels with his finger. Several ran directly beneath where the Nymph now stood. "May I study these more closely?" "Of course." Though I don't see how old pipes relate to marble restoration. But Antonio was already seeing connections, patterns emerging like constellations when eyes adjust to darkness. You must understand, dear listener, that detection often lies not in discovering new facts, but in recognizing relationships between existing ones. That afternoon, while rain continued its percussion against windows, Antonio spread Moreau's plans across a table in the small study allocated for his use. The Frenchman had been ambitious. His system would have created a garden that breathed with water, channels carrying moisture to where it was needed, drainage preventing floods. But more interesting were his notes about placement of decorative elements. Les statues doivent être positionnées où l'humidité naturelle les préservera. The statues should be positioned where natural humidity will preserve them. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Beatrice entered without waiting for permission, a privilege of youth and nobility combined. "You're studying Uncle's dusty papers. How thrilling!" But her sarcasm was gentle, curious. She moved closer, and Antonio caught the scent of rosewater and rebellion. "I study French, you know. Mother insisted, though Uncle thinks it gives me radical ideas." She read over his shoulder. "This Moreau understood water like blood in veins." "You have interesting ideas for a young lady of society," Antonio observed carefully. "Society has interesting ideas about young ladies," she countered. "Tell me, Senor Silva, do you think Portugal will always worship mysteries rather than seeking truth?" Before he could formulate a safe answer, She produced an envelope from her sleeve. "Would you post this for me in Sintra? Uncle's servants report everything to him, but you're between worlds, aren't you?" The envelope was addressed to a newspaper in Lisbon, the direction written in educated, feminine hand. Antonio understood he was being drawn into something beyond marble restoration. But there was something in her eyes, not pleading, but recognition. One outsider to another. Evening brought Dr. Tavares for his weekly visit to Dom Rodrigo's gout. The physician joined them for dinner, his scientific rationalism now vindicated by the storm's arrival. "You see, Father Tomas, barometric pressure explains everything. No need for weeping statues." "And yet," the priest replied, buttering his bread with contemplative strokes, "the statue did weep. Whether by miracle or nature, the warning was given." Joachim, standing by the wall in his role as senior servant during formal dinners, nodded approvingly at the priest's words. The old gardener's faith remained unshaken, perhaps even strengthened by the storm's confirmation. After dinner, Antonio ventured back to the garden despite the continuing drizzle. He brought a lamp, its light creating a sphere of visibility in the darkness. The nymph stood patient as always, water running off her marble skin like the very tears she was famous for. He examined the base again, this time noticing something he'd missed before. Tiny holes, almost invisible, where the statue met its pedestal. They could have been damage, or poor restoration, or... He knelt, feeling the pedestal itself. It was not solid stone as it appeared, but a clever construction of marble facing over a hollow core. His fingers found seams, joints, the work of a craftsman who knew his business. "You're getting wet again," Isabel's voice came from behind him. She held an umbrella and a second lamp. "I saw your light from the kitchen." "You're observant," Antonio said, not turning from his examination. "Servants who aren't observant don't last long." She moved closer, holding her lamp to add its light to his. "What have you found?" He showed her the construction, the holes, the hollow nature of the base. Her quick intelligence grasped the implications immediately. "It's not just standing there, it's connected?" "To something below, yes." He stood, his shoulder protesting. "Those French plans show water channels exactly here." Isabel looked at the statue's serene face, then back at Antonio. "But Joachim, he truly believes." "And perhaps he should continue to believe," Antonio said quietly. "Truth isn't always kind, and comfort has its own value." The morning after the storm brought that peculiar clarity that follows Portuguese rain, air washed clean, colors intensified as if the world had been restored by some cosmic craftsman. Antonio found Father Tomas in the garden at first light, kneeling beside a bed of roses with a magnifying glass, examining the petals with scientific devotion. "Señor Silva, come see, the rain has brought out the most extraordinary patterns in these hybrid varieties." The priest's enthusiasm made him seem younger than his 45 years. Each droplet acts as a lens, revealing structures invisible to the casual observer. Antonio knelt beside him, ignoring his shoulder's protest. The roses were indeed beautiful under magnification, their petals showing intricate cellular patterns. "You study botany seriously, Father?" "God reveals himself through his creation," Father Tomas replied, then added more quietly, "though sometimes I wonder if we mistake the mechanism for the message." They walked together through the garden, the priest pointing out various specimens with the pride of a collector.
Near the pond, they encountered Silvestre cleaning debris left by the storm. The boy worked with focused energy, clearly hoping to impress someone, whether Joaquim, his master, or some imagined future employer. "The storm brought down a nest," Silvestre said, showing them an intricate construction of twigs and moss. But the birds had already gone. They know, don't they?"
"Like the statue knows." Father Tomas examined the nest carefully. "Nature has its own intelligence, my son. Though whether that intelligence comes from within or above." He trailed off, lost in theological complexity. At breakfast, Dom Rodrigo appeared in better spirits. His gout temporarily retreated. "Silva, I've been thinking about your restoration work. The statues have been neglected too long. My father would be appalled. He loved these gardens more than his own children, God rest his soul." Beatrice entered late, her dress showing evidence of a morning walk despite the wet grounds.
"Uncle, the most interesting thing, I found old journals in the Blue Room's secretary, grandmother's from the 1820s.
She produced a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed but intact.
Listen to this entry from September 1822. Monsieur Moreau continues his mysterious work in the lower garden. He speaks of creating a garden that breathes and dreams.
Rodrigo, that's grandfather, indulges his every whim, convinced we'll have the finest grounds in Portugal. Dom Rodrigo took the journal reverently. "Mother's hand. I barely remember her. She died when I was 7. Antonio watched this family archaeology with professional interest. You see, dear listener, the past never truly passes. It simply settles into layers, waiting for someone to excavate meaning from accumulated time. That afternoon, Antonio made a discovery that changed his understanding of the nymph's tears. While cleaning a nearby statue of Mercury, he noticed its base was similar to the nymph's, the same hollow construction, the same tiny holes. But Mercury had never wept, according to Joaquim and the household lore. He tested the marble itself, using dilute acid from his restoration kit. Mercury's stone barely reacted, dense, low-porosity Carrara of the finest quality. But a similar test on the nymph showed immediate fizzing. This marble was indeed different, more porous, almost sponge-like in its microscopic structure. Isabel appeared with her usual timing, bringing coffee.
"You look like someone solving a puzzle."
"Several puzzles," Antonio admitted, accepting the cup gratefully.
"Tell me, has Mercury ever predicted weather?"
She shook her head.
"Only the nymph. Joaquim says she's special because she stands where a spring once was, before Monsieur Moreau changed everything."
A spring? This was new information.
"My mother told me. She worked here as a girl before she married. There was a natural spring that Moreau incorporated into his design. The old people said the spring was sacred, that Romans had built a shrine here."
Antonio felt pieces clicking together like well-fitted stones. A spring would mean constant moisture from below, water table close to the surface. Combined with porous marble and the hollow pedestal connecting to underground channels. That evening, Beatrice cornered him in the hallway.
"Did you post my letter?"
"It was sent this morning, Senora." She smiled with relief.
"You must think me foolish, writing to newspapers about social reform."
"I think you're young and believe the world can change," Antonio replied carefully.
"That's not foolishness, merely optimism requiring experience for balance."
"You speak like someone who's had their optimism balanced by experience." Antonio thought of Maria, dead 3 years now, her optimism about recovery lasting until the very end.
Balance comes whether we seek it or not, Senora. Dr. Tavares arrived for an unexpected visit, summoned because Dom Rodrigo's foot had swollen again. After treating his patient, the doctor joined Antonio in examining the nymph. "Fascinating construction," he said, studying the pedestal.
Almost like the anatomical models I studied in Paris, systems within systems. You studied in Paris? 1838 to 40. Extraordinary time. Science was exploding old superstitions daily, though sometimes. He glanced toward the house where Father Tomas could be seen reading by lamplight. I wonder if we weren't also destroying something valuable in our eagerness to explain everything. They discussed the marble's porosity, the underground water, the atmospheric conditions that might combine to create the weeping effect. Dr. Tavares produced a small barometer from his bag. "I've been recording pressure changes for 2 years. There's definitely a pattern. Pressure drops, humidity rises, and if the ground is already saturated from previous rains, the porous marble absorbs moisture from below," Antonio continued. "And when the air becomes humid enough, the temperature differential causes condensation on the surface." "Exactly. But why only the face?" Why tears specifically? Antonio had been pondering this. The face has the most delicate carving, the thinnest marble. And tears. Perhaps the original sculptor created channels, tiny grooves to guide water for artistic effect, never knowing they'd one day guide condensation instead. Late that night, unable to sleep, Antonio walked the garden by moonlight. The statues stood like a frozen court, each holding its secret history. He thought about truth and comfort, about Joaquim's faith and Isabel's intelligence, about Beatrice's letters, and Father Tomas's struggles with God and science. The nymph stood serene in moonlight, dry now, waiting for the next atmospheric confluence to make her weep. Antonio touched her face gently, craftsman to craft, understanding to mystery. Sometimes, he thought, the most profound truth is knowing when not to speak it. Through a lit window, he could see Joaquim in the servants' hall, telling younger workers about the garden's wonders, his hands moving like a conductor describing a symphony only he could hear. The old gardener's faith in the miraculous was itself a kind of miracle. A man finding meaning in marble and moisture, divinity in condensation. 3 days had passed since the storm, and the garden steamed gently in morning sun, giving up its moisture like an offering to the sky. Antonio worked methodically on a statue of Diana, removing decades of lichen with solutions of his own mixing, when Isabel approached with unusual urgency in her step. "Señor Silva," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "There's something you should know. The well behind the kitchen, I've been watching it for years." She led him to a simple stone well, partially hidden by kitchen herbs that Cookie grew for seasoning. Isabel drew up the bucket, pointing to marks on the rope. "See these knots? I tied them at different water levels. Before each storm, when the nymph weeps, the water rises significantly, sometimes 2 full meters." Antonio studied the rope with growing excitement. Here was empirical evidence, careful observation conducted by someone nobody would suspect of scientific inquiry. "How long have you been recording this?" 6 years, since I learned my letters." She produced a small notebook from her apron, its pages filled with dates and measurements in painstaking handwriting. "My mother thought education wasted on a girl who'd only be a servant, but the previous owner's daughter, God rest her, taught me in secret." The notebook was a revelation,
systematic observations of water levels, weather patterns, even moon phases. You might wonder, dear listener, at finding such scientific rigor in unexpected places, but intelligence, like water, finds its way through whatever channels are available.
"This corresponds exactly with the nymph's weeping?" Antonio asked, though the answer was clear from her notations. "Every time. The water rises, the nymph weeps, the storm comes. I thought perhaps there was a natural explanation, but Joachim insists it's miraculous. And who am I to contradict?" Their conversation was interrupted by shouting from the main house. They hurried back to find chaos in the morning room. Don Rodrigo's prized medallion of Saint Sebastian, a family heirloom from the 1600s, was missing from its display case. "It was here yesterday evening," Don Rodrigo declared, his face flushed with anger and gout in equal measure. "I showed it to Dr. Tavares specifically." Suspicion fell immediately on the newest servants, a kitchen maid hired just last month, a stable boy whose references had seemed slightly uncertain. Joachim stood grave and judgmental, already deciding guilt based on hierarchies of trust built over decades.
Beatrice appeared distressed, though Antonio noticed her distress seemed more about the upheaval than the missing medallion.
"Uncle, surely there's an explanation? Perhaps it was moved for cleaning?" "Without my permission? Impossible!" Dom Rodrigo's cane struck the floor for emphasis. The household transformed into a maze of suspicion. Servants whispered in corners, alliances formed and dissolved, old resentments surfaced like bubbles in disturbed water. Antonio continued his work, but his mind turned over possibilities. The medallion was valuable, certainly, but its theft seemed oddly timed, almost designed to create maximum disruption. That afternoon, while cleaning the base of a cherub near the main house, Antonio's chisel dislodged something that clinked against stone. Reaching into the gap between statue and pedestal, his fingers found metal, round, heavy, attached to a broken chain. The medallion of Saint Sebastian emerged covered in dirt and tarnish, clearly fallen months ago during some cleaning or maintenance. He sat back on his heels, considering. The simple truth would restore peace, but might also embarrass Dom Rodrigo, who had already accused half his household. Moreover, it would deny him an opportunity to observe how this small crisis revealed the estate's hidden dynamics. Father Tomas found him there, still holding the medallion. The priest's eyes widened with understanding. "God provides solutions in his own time," he said carefully. "Indeed, though perhaps God needs assistance in presentation." They devised a plan. Father Tomas would discover the medallion while blessing the garden statues, a ritual he'd been meaning to perform anyway. This would save face for everyone, while adding a miraculous gloss to mundane accident. Meanwhile, Isabel shared more of her observations as they walked along the stream. "The water here connects to old caves in the hills. During the French invasions, people hid in them. My grandmother spoke of underground rivers, whole chambers where water drips constantly." Antonio thought of limestone caves, how water carved channels through soluble rock over millennia. The Nymph stood above such hidden architecture, connected through Moreau's abandoned channels to an underground world of moisture and movement. "Have you ever discussed your observations with anyone?" he asked. "With whom?" "Joachim would call it blasphemy. The other servants would think me above my station. And the family..." She shrugged eloquently. That evening brought an unexpected visitor, a journalist from Lisbon, claiming to be writing about historic gardens of Portugal. He was young, earnest, with ink-stained fingers and revolutionary ideas barely concealed beneath professional courtesy. Beatrice could barely contain her excitement, though she pretended casual interest.
"The Quinta das Lágrimas has such fascinating stories," the journalist said over dinner. "The weeping statue, for instance. In Lisbon, they speak of it as evidence that the old ways still hold power." Joaquim, serving at table, straightened with pride. "The old ways understand truths that modern thinking cannot grasp, senor." Dr. Tavares cleared his throat. "Yet modern thinking has given us medicine, engineering, understanding of natural phenomena." "And has it made men happier?" Father Tomas asked gently. "Has it answered why we suffer, why we love, why beauty moves us to tears?" The conversation circled like water finding its level. Science and faith, tradition and progress, the Portugal that was and the Portugal becoming. Antonio noticed Beatrice slip a note to the journalist when she thought nobody was watching. He noticed, too, that Isabel noticed, her quick eyes missing nothing, while her hands continued their silent service. Later, as the household settled for sleep, Antonio stood again before the nymph. He now understood her mechanism, the porous marble, the underground moisture, the atmospheric conditions combining to create tears. But understanding, he realized, didn't diminish the poetry of it. A statue that wept before storms remained wonderful whether the cause was miraculous or natural. Silvestra appeared from the shadows, unable to sleep. "Senor Silva, may I ask something? Joaquim says you're the finest stoneworker in Portugal, that you've restored saints and angels. Do you believe they're grateful?" "Stone doesn't feel gratitude," Antonio replied gently. "But perhaps the people who see beauty restored do, and that's enough." The boy nodded slowly, processing this pragmatic philosophy. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere in the hills, water moved through hidden channels, preparing perhaps for the next convergence of conditions that would make marble weep. The library at Quinta das Lágrimas held secrets in layers, like sediment in ancient stone. Antonio spent the morning of May 31st among Dom Rodrigo's accumulated papers, searching for more of Moreau's documents. The French architect had been thorough. Beneath the original plans, Antonio discovered detailed geological surveys, notes on water tables, even correspondence with engineers from Paris about hydraulic principles. One letter, dated March 1821, proved particularly illuminating. Moreau wrote to a colleague, "I have discovered here a natural phenomenon most extraordinary. Springs that respond to barometric pressure like a body responding to breath. I am designing the garden to embrace this breathing, to make it visible in subtle ways that will seem magical to those who don't understand hydraulics." Antonio was copying this passage when Beatrice entered, no longer bothering with pretense of accidental encounters. "The journalist left this morning," she said, producing a small volume from her skirts. "He gave me this, a book of social essays from France. If Uncle knew—" "Your uncle knows more than he reveals," Antonio observed. "Men who've been diplomats learn to see everything while appearing to notice nothing." She considered this, then sat uninvited across from him. "Like you, Senor Silva. You see everything but say only what serves the moment." Before he could respond, Dom Rodrigo himself appeared, moving slowly but steadily on his cane. "Niece, leave Senor Silva to his work. We have correspondence to discuss."
Beatrice departed with obvious reluctance. Dom Rodrigo settled heavily into the chair she'd vacated, studying Antonio with eyes that had evaluated ambassadors and ministers. "You've discovered Moreau's plans, and more, I suspect." "Your garden is an engineering marvel disguised as romantic landscaping," Antonio replied, deciding on honesty. Moreau understood water in ways that were advanced for his time. He was a genius and possibly mad. The two often danced together. Dom Rodrigo gestured toward the window where the garden stretched green and glistening. "My father spent a fortune on his vision. Then the wars came, Moreau fled, and we were left with half a dream realized." "The nymph's pedestal connects to his system," Antonio said carefully. Dom Rodrigo smiled slightly. "Does it? How interesting. Yet she weeps before storms. That much is undeniable." The old diplomat was offering a bargain, Antonio realized. Truth acknowledged privately, mystery maintained publicly. It was the Portuguese way, accommodation between what was known and what was believed, neither canceling the other. That afternoon, Antonio made a systematic exploration of the garden's lower levels, where Moreau's construction was most visible. Behind a screen of overgrown jasmine, he found an access point, a small stone door almost invisible beneath climbing vines. Inside, narrow steps descended into darkness. He returned with lamps and tools, and to his surprise, Isabel was waiting. "I knew you'd find this. I've known about it for years, but never had courage to explore alone." Together they descended into Moreau's hidden world. The passage opened into a chamber where water moved through carved channels, gathering in pools before continuing its journey. The ceiling dripped constantly, condensation from the warm earth meeting cool stone. It was like being inside the garden's circulatory system. "Look," Isabel pointed to markings on the wall, numbers and dates carved carefully. "Someone's been maintaining this." They followed the channels until they stood directly beneath where the nymph should be. Here, a vertical shaft rose into darkness, and Antonio could see the hollow pedestal's connection to this underground system. Water rose and fell in the shaft, responding to some deeper rhythm. "It's breathing," Isabel whispered. "Just like the earth breathes." They emerged to find Sylvester waiting anxiously. "Senor Silva, Joaquim is looking for you. He's upset, says you're disturbing things that shouldn't be disturbed." Indeed, the old gardener stood by the nymph, his weathered face set in lines of disapproval. "You go where you shouldn't, senor. Some mysteries are meant to remain mysterious." "All mysteries yield to understanding, given time," Antonio replied mildly. "And what happens when everything is understood? When there's no wonder left?" Joaquim's voice carried genuine distress. "I've given my life to this garden's magic. Would you take that from me in my final years?" Antonio felt the weight of the question. You see, dear listener, there are different kinds of cruelty, and sometimes the cruelest is to strip meaning from a life lived in service to wonder. Dr. Tavares arrived for his evening visit, finding Antonio cleaning his tools by the fountain. "I've been thinking about our statue," the physician said. "Even if we understand the mechanism, isn't there something remarkable about stone that can predict weather? Perhaps the miracle isn't in the supernatural, but in the natural itself." "You sound like Father Tomas," Antonio observed. "Perhaps we're both trying to reconcile what we know with what we feel. It's the modern condition, too much knowledge for faith, too much mystery for certainty." At dinner, the medallion's miraculous recovery was celebrated. Father Tomas had performed his blessing that afternoon, discovering the medallion with theatrical surprise that fooled no one but satisfied everyone. The kitchen maid and stable boy, previously under suspicion, served with obvious relief. Later, Antonio found himself in unexpected conference with Father Tomas and Dr. Tavares in the priest's study.
"We three understand what the others don't," Father Tomas said, pouring wine from a bottle he'd been saving. "The question is what we do with our understanding." "Science demands we reveal truth," Dr. Tavares said, though without conviction. "Faith demands we preserve comfort," Father Tomas countered, equally uncertain. Antonio turned his wine glass, watching candlelight through the red liquid. "Craft demands we respect the work, both Moreau's engineering and Joachim's mythology. Both are creations of value." They drank in contemplative silence, three men caught between worlds. Outside, night sounds filled the garden, owls calling, water running, wind through marble limbs that would never feel its touch. Near midnight, unable to sleep, Antonio encountered Dom Rodrigo in the garden, standing before the nymph, despite the pain it must have caused his foot. "My father stood here the night before he died," the old man said. "He told me the garden would speak to me if I learned to listen."
"I have been listening for 60 years, Silva. Sometimes I think I almost understand."
"What do you hear, Senor?"
"Time passing, love persisting. The conversation between what we build and what builds us."
He touched the nymph's base gently.
"Moreau may have built the channels, but something else decides when tears should fall." June arrived with unusual heat, the kind that makes Portuguese stone radiate warmth long after sunset. Antonio had been working since dawn on the Mercury statue, but his mind wandered to patterns, water table fluctuations, barometric pressure, the delicate balance that made marble weep. Isabel's notebook had revealed a rhythm. Approximately every 12 to 15 days during the wet season, conditions aligned for the phenomenon. By his calculations, another convergence approached. That morning, Joachim watched Antonio work with increasing agitation.
The old gardener had been counting days too, in his own way, watching ants, feeling the air's weight, reading signs in leaf and cloud.
"Tomorrow," he announced to Silvestre, "the nymph will speak tomorrow."
Antonio said nothing, but he'd reached the same conclusion through different means. The water in Isabel's well had risen steadily for 2 days. His shoulder ached with particular insistence. Dr. Tavares's barometer, which the doctor had lent him, showed pressure dropping steadily. At midday, Beatrice found him examining the Mercury statue's base more carefully. "You're going to predict the rain before the statue does, aren't you?" Her voice held both excitement and apprehension. "Would that be wise, Senora?" "Wise? No. But truthful." She twisted her parasol nervously. "The journalist, his newspaper wants to write about our weeping nymph. They're calling it a symbol of the old Portugal resisting modern times." "I don't know whether to be proud or embarrassed." Before Antonio could respond, commotion erupted near the main house. Dom Rodrigo had collapsed in his study, his gout finally overwhelming his stubborn refusal to rest. Dr. Tavares was summoned urgently, and the household fell into that peculiar suspension that comes with medical crisis. The doctor emerged after an hour, grave but reassuring. "He needs complete rest. The stress of managing the estate combined with his condition, his heart protests what his joints have long been saying." With Dom Rodrigo confined to bed, A strange democracy descended on the estate. Servants moved with less careful choreography. Beatrice assumed authority she'd clearly been preparing to wield, and even Joachim seemed uncertain without the master's presence to anchor the hierarchy. That evening, Antonio made his own prediction. He told Father Tomas, quietly, that rain would come by tomorrow evening.
The signs are clear: moisture rising from below, pressure dropping from above. The marble will weep by noon. Father Tomas looked troubled. But Joachim hasn't announced it yet. He always knows first. It's been his pride for 20 years. Perhaps, Antonio suggested carefully, someone might mention to him that the signs seem particularly clear. Let him make his announcement. But pride, dear listener, is a delicate thing, especially when it's all someone has left. The next morning, Joachim stood before the nymph at dawn, touching the marble with trembling fingers, reading signs that weren't there yet. The stone remained dry. "She's not ready," he announced to the gathered servants, though uncertainty cracked his voice. "Perhaps tomorrow." Antonio watched from his workstation, saw the old man's confusion, the way he kept returning to touch the statue. By 10 o'clock, with the sun climbing and the air thick with unshed moisture, Joachim's distress was visible. Sylvester looked between his master and Antonio, understanding dawning in his young eyes. At 11, Antonio made a decision that went against every instinct of his careful nature. He approached Joachim directly. "The water channels below are responding. I can feel it through the stones I'm working on." Joachim turned on him with sudden fury. "You think you understand her? 40 years I've tended this garden, and you come with your Roman dust and your tools and think you can read what I cannot?" "I think," Antonio said quietly, "that perhaps she speaks differently to different listeners. You hear with your heart. I feel through stone. Both are true." The old gardener's anger crumbled into something more painful: doubt. But before he could respond, Isabel called out, "Look! The nymph!" Indeed, moisture was beginning to form on the marble face, earlier than Antonio had predicted. The household gathered, as always, but there was a different quality to their watching, an awareness that something had shifted in the garden's order. Joachim stood straighter, his authority partially restored. "The rain comes," he announced, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "By evening, perhaps sooner." Dr. Tavares had been monitoring his barometer obsessively. He pulled Antonio aside. "You predicted this before the statue showed signs. How?" "The underground water rose first. The statue responds to that before atmospheric moisture becomes visible. It's a two-stage process." Antonio explained about the channels, the porous marble, the complex system Moreau had created or discovered. The doctor's eyes lit with scientific excitement. "We could write a paper for the Academy of Sciences. This is remarkable. A natural barometer created through architectural design." "And destroy an old man's purpose?" Antonio gestured toward Joachim, who was explaining the nymph's message to younger servants with something approaching his old confidence. That afternoon, clouds built from the west as predicted. Dom Rodrigo, despite doctor's orders, had himself carried to a chair by the window to watch. Beatrice read to him from her grandmother's journal, entries about other storms, other predictions, the garden's long conversation with weather. At 4 o'clock, with the first drops beginning to fall, Antonio found Joachim sheltering under an arcade, watching the rain arrive. "You knew," the old gardener said simply. "You knew before she wept."
"I knew differently, not better," Antonio replied. "Your knowledge comes from decades of observation, mine from understanding stone and water. Neither is complete without the other." Joaquim was quiet for a long moment.
"Sylvester says you've been in the underground chambers, seen Moreau's construction." "I have. Is it wonderful or mundane?" Antonio considered carefully. "It's both. Like a heart is both a pump and the seat of love. The mechanism doesn't diminish the mystery." The old gardener smiled sadly. "You're kind to say so. But I know what I know. My time of reading signs is ending. My eyes fail. My joints speak louder than the garden now." "Then teach Sylvestre both ways of knowing," Antonio suggested. "The signs you read and the science beneath them. Let him carry forward a complete understanding." Rain fell harder now, turning the garden into an impressionist painting. Through the water, the statues seemed to move slightly, to breathe, to live. It was illusion, of course, but illusion that revealed truth about human need for animation, for companionship even from stone. The rain had passed, leaving the garden jeweled with droplets that caught afternoon light like suspended prisms. Antonio gathered his evidence carefully. Isabel's water measurements, Moreau's architectural plans, his own observations of the marble's porosity. The truth sat complete before him, a puzzle assembled from pieces hidden across decades. Dr. Tavares arrived early that second day of June, his medical bag supplemented by scientific instruments. "Dom Rodrigo is recovering, but slowly. His heart needs rest. His mind won't allow." He paused, studying Antonio's assembled materials. "You're preparing to reveal everything?" "To reveal to some," Antonio corrected. "Truth doesn't require universal announcement." Father Tomas joined them in the small study, his round face showing the strain of recent contemplations. "I've been praying about this matter. Is it not prideful to think we must expose every mystery? Perhaps God works through porous marble as surely as through burning bushes." They made an unlikely trinity, craftsman, physician, and priest, united by knowledge that felt heavier than stone. You must understand, dear listener, that revelation carries responsibility. To know is to choose. Preserve comfort or serve truth. Maintain mystery or advance understanding. Antonio had arranged a demonstration in the underground chamber. He'd invited only Father Tomas and Dr. Tavares, knowing that selective revelation often proved wiser than general announcement. They descended through the hidden entrance, lamps casting dancing shadows on carved channels. "Observe," Antonio said, kneeling beside the main channel. "The water level here corresponds exactly to Isabel's well measurements. When underground pressure increases, from rain in the distant hills, from seasonal water table rises, it pushes moisture up through this shaft." He led them to stand beneath the Nymph's position. "The shaft connects to the hollow pedestal. Moisture rises through capillary action, enhanced by the porous marble's natural tendency to absorb water. The statue becomes saturated from within." Dr. Tavares measured the temperature difference between the stone walls and the air. "Remarkable. The temperature gradient would indeed cause condensation when atmospheric humidity reaches a certain threshold." "But why only the face?" Father Tomas asked, genuinely curious now that his theological concerns had been addressed. Antonio produced a magnifying glass, showing them photographs he'd made of the marble surface. See these microscopic channels in the facial features. Whether by design or accident, they guide moisture into tear-like paths. The sculptor may have intended this, or time and weathering created the perfect conditions. So Moreau knew? Dr. Tavares asked. His letters suggest he understood the principle, if not every detail. He positioned the statue deliberately over this convergence of water channels. Whether he predicted the exact effect or simply created conditions for something remarkable to emerge, that remains mysterious. They stood in the dripping chamber, each processing this knowledge differently. Father Tomas saw divine providence in the coincidences required. Dr. Tavares saw natural laws displaying their elegant consistency. Antonio saw generations of human craft and observation creating unintended beauty. Returning to the surface, they found Joachim teaching Silvestre about weather signs, how cats groom differently before rain, how certain birds fall silent, how the very air takes on weight. The boy listened with intense concentration, clearly torn between his master's folk wisdom and his growing awareness of scientific explanation. "Silvestre," Antonio called out, "both Señor Joachim and the marble speak truth. One doesn't cancel the other." The old gardener looked at him sharply, understanding more than was said. "You've been below," he stated rather than asked.
You've seen Moreau's work. I've seen engineering that becomes poetry, intention that becomes mystery. Your understanding of the garden's moods remains more valuable than any blueprint. That evening, a small council convened in Dom Rodrigo's bedroom. The old diplomat, propped on pillows, listened as Antonio presented his findings with careful diplomacy. Beatrice sat by the window, her expression moving between fascination and concern for tradition. Isabel, who'd been invited at Antonio's insistence, stood near the door as if ready to flee if her presence proved too presumptuous. "So," Dom Rodrigo said finally, "my weeping nymph is a barometer constructed by accident and time." "Not accident," Antonio corrected gently. "Convergence. Moreau's knowledge, the sculptor's art, the marble's nature, Joachim's observation, all meeting to create something none could have achieved alone." "And what would you have me do with this knowledge?" "Whatever serves the estate best."
Truth and mystery can coexist. The rainbow remains beautiful, even when we understand refraction. Dom Rodrigo was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the coverlet in a rhythm that might have been calculation or meditation. "Isabel," he said suddenly, "your notebook of observations. May I see it?" She approached nervously, offering the small journal. Dom Rodrigo studied it with the attention he'd once given to diplomatic correspondence. "Remarkable. You've been conducting science without knowing its name. What else have you observed that we've failed to notice?" "Many things, señor," Isabel replied carefully. "Servants see patterns that masters might miss, being too close to daily variations." "Then perhaps," Dom Rodrigo said slowly, "we should pay attention to all forms of observation. Joachim's weather wisdom, Isabel's measurements, Antonio's understanding of stone, the doctor's instruments, all are threads in the tapestry." Beatrice spoke for the first time. "The journalist will return next week. What should we tell him about our miraculous statue?" "Tell him," her uncle replied, "that the Quinta das Lágrimas possesses a marvel, a statue that weeps before storms, alerting us to nature's intentions through mechanisms both ancient and mysterious. Let his readers decide what category of wonder that represents." Later that night, Antonio walked the garden alone, his work on the statues nearly complete. The nymph stood in moonlight, dry now, waiting for the next alignment of conditions. He thought about his time here, the layers of understanding he'd uncovered like sediment removed from marble. Father Tomas appeared beside him, moving quietly for a man of his build. "You've given us a gift, Señor Silva. Knowledge that doesn't destroy wonder. That's rarer than any weeping statue." Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't in what we don't understand, but in how understanding itself changes nothing about beauty or meaning. The priest smiled.
"You sound like a theologian. Dangerous thinking for a craftsman." "All craft is theology," Antonio replied. "We take raw material and shape it toward purpose. Whether that purpose comes from within or beyond, that's the only question that matters."
The 3rd of June dawned with the peculiar brightness that follows days of rain, when every surface reflects light as if the world has been glazed. Antonio packed his tools with the methodical care of a man who knows each implement's value, while the household prepared for multiple resolutions. The medallion's return had been formally celebrated the previous evening, with Dom Rodrigo graciously forgiving the mysterious displacement without assigning blame. The kitchen maid and stable boy, once suspected, now served with particular diligence, their relief manifesting in perfectly polished silver and meticulously swept pads.
But larger revelations hung in the air like morning mist, waiting to either dissipate or condense into something substantial. Beatrice intercepted Antonio near the fountain, where he was completing final touches on a cherub's wing. "The journalist returns tomorrow," she said, her usual confidence tempered with uncertainty. "I've been corresponding with him about social progress, about Portugal's need to embrace rational thought. But now, seeing how truth and comfort interweave here..." "Perhaps progress isn't replacing old wisdom with new, but finding how they converse," Antonio suggested, his chisel moving in precise strokes. She produced a letter from her sleeve, not hidden this time, but carried openly. "He's asked me to write about the Nymph for his newspaper. My uncle has given permission, surprisingly. He says a woman's perspective might soften what could otherwise seem mere superstition." Before Antonio could respond, Joaquim approached with Silvestre. The old gardener moved slowly, but with renewed purpose. "Señor Silva, I owe you something. Perhaps an apology, perhaps thanks. I'm too old to distinguish between them anymore." "You owe me nothing, Señor Joaquim. Nevertheless, I offer both." He gestured to Silvestre. "I've been teaching the boy your way of seeing alongside mine. He knows now about water tables and pressure, about marble drinking moisture like wine. But he also knows which birds announce storms 3 days early, how the roses turn their leaves before rain." Silvestre nodded eagerly. "It's like learning 2 languages for the same poem, Señor Silva. Both beautiful, both true." The boy's metaphor was more profound than he probably realized. You see, dear listener, we spend so much effort defending one truth against another, not recognizing that reality often speaks in harmonies rather than solos. Dr. Tavares arrived with unexpected news. "The Academy of Sciences in Lisbon. They've heard rumors about our statue." "They're sending an investigator, a Professor Henriquez, to document the phenomenon." Dom Rodrigo, who had ventured downstairs despite medical advice, laughed with genuine amusement. "Let him come. We'll show him a wonder that exists precisely at the boundary between science and mystery. Antonio, you'll speak with him?" "If you wish, though I suspect Joaquim and Isabel together could provide more complete testimony than I alone." Isabel, who had been arranging flowers nearby,
looked up with surprise. "Señor, I couldn't possibly address a professor." "Why not?" Beatrice interjected with sudden passion. "You've conducted more careful observation than most Academy members. Your notebook contains 6 years of data they'd pay handsomely to obtain." Dom Rodrigo raised his hand for silence. "It's decided. When Professor Henriquez arrives, he'll hear from all who hold pieces of this truth: Joaquim's folklore, Isabel's measurements, Antonio's analysis, even Father Tomas's theological perspective.
Let the Academy make what sense they will from our chorus." That afternoon brought an unexpected discovery. While completing his restoration of the Mercury statue, Antonio's chisel dislodged a small metal cylinder from a crack in the base. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a note in French dated August 1823. "To whoever finds this, know that I, Jean-Baptiste Moreau, have created here a garden that breathes with the earth itself. The nymph by the stream stands above a natural phenomenon I've enhanced, but not created. She will weep when conditions align, not through mechanism, but through harmony between stone and sky and water. This is my gift to future generations. A mystery built on understanding, a miracle constructed from nature. May she bring wonder long after the reasons are forgotten." Antonio shared the note with the assembled household. Father Tomas crossed himself, seeing providence in the timing of this discovery. Dr. Tavares marveled at Moreau's foresight. Joaquim wept openly, validation and loss mingling in his tears. "He knew," the old gardener said softly. "Moreau knew what he was creating, not deceiving, but revealing, making visible what was always there." Dom Rodrigo took the note with reverent hands. "This goes in our archive, but also in our story. When the professor comes, when the journalist writes, when visitors ask, we tell them about the French architect who built a conversation between earth and sky, and the generations who've learned to listen." That evening the estate gathered for what felt like a celebration, though no one quite named it as such. The servants ate at table with the family, Dom Rodrigo's democratic impulse surprising everyone, including himself. Stories were shared about the garden's history, about other mysteries solved and unsolved. Isabel, emboldened by wine and acceptance, told of finding a pattern in how different statues weathered based on their positions relative to prevailing winds. Sylvester described his growing ability to predict weather by combining Joaquim's signs with Antonio's science. Even Father Tomas admitted to documenting correlations between plant behavior and barometric pressure, his scientific journals hidden beneath volumes of theology. As night deepened, Antonio found himself standing with Beatrice and Isabel by the Nymph, an unlikely trinity united by curiosity. "What will you write?" he asked Beatrice. "The truth, but gently. That Portugal's mysteries deserve respect even as we seek understanding. That wisdom comes in many forms, through many voices." She turned to Isabel. "I want to quote your observations with your permission. A servant who conducts science, a noble who respects tradition. We're both defying expectations." Isabel smiled with a confidence Antonio hadn't seen before. "Perhaps defying expectations is how Portugal moves forward, not abandoning the old, but refusing to be limited by it." The moon rose full and bright, turning the garden silver. The nymph stood patient as always, her marble face serene whether wet or dry. Tomorrow would bring departures and new arrivals, revelations and preservations.
But tonight, in this moment suspended between understanding and mystery, the garden held all its truths in perfect balance. Joachim appeared one last time, moving through his domain with the careful steps of age and authority. "Señor Silva," he called out, "the signs say rain again in 2 weeks. The nymph will weep on the feast of Santo Antonio." Antonio consulted his mental calculations, water table patterns, pressure cycles, seasonal variations. "I believe you're right, Señor Joachim." The old gardener smiled. "Of course I am.
I have science on my side now." The morning of June 4th arrived with a kind of pristine clarity that makes Portuguese light famous among painters. Antonio stood in the garden one last time, his work complete, his bags packed, watching early sun transform marble from cold stone to warm presence. Each statue bore subtle signs of his restoration, lichen removed, cracks sealed, beauty retrieved from time's patient erosion. Dom Rodrigo had insisted on a formal farewell breakfast, though Antonio had requested simplicity. The dining room felt different now, hierarchies softened by shared knowledge. Isabel served with the quiet dignity of someone whose intelligence had been acknowledged. Joachim sat at table rather than standing, another of Dom Rodrigo's recent democratic gestures. "Your work has been exemplary," Dom Rodrigo said, raising his coffee cup in an informal toast. But more than the restoration, you've given us something precious. A way to hold both truth and wonder without choosing between them.
Father Tomas had brought a gift, a small volume of pressed flowers annotated with both their common names and Latin classifications. "For your travels," he said, "remember that everything has multiple names, multiple truths." Dr. Tavares presented his own offering, a portable barometer in a leather case. "For predicting your own storms, meteorological or otherwise." Even Joachim had something to give, a cutting from the garden's oldest rose, wrapped in damp cloth. "Plant this wherever you settle next. Gardens remember those who understand them." But perhaps the most touching farewell came from Silvestre, who approached nervously with a notebook similar to Isabel's. "I've started recording everything, Señor, the old ways and the new. Would you write something in it?"
Advice for someone learning to see properly. Antonio wrote carefully. Truth lives in the space between what we observe and what we imagine. Tend both with equal care. The journalist had arrived early that morning, eager for his story. Antonio left him in animated discussion with Beatrice, her words weaving tradition and progress into something uniquely Portuguese. Through the window, he could see them walking toward the nymph, Beatrice gesturing eloquently while the young man scribbled notes. Isabel found Antonio loading his tools into the waiting carriage. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply. "Not for solving the mystery, that was always there to find, but for showing that someone like me could be part of finding it." "Continue your observations," Antonio urged. "Document everything. Someday, someone will recognize the science you've been conducting all along." She handed him a small package. "From all of us below stairs." We took up a collection. Inside was a piece of marble, clearly ancient, worn smooth by countless hands. "It's from the old fountain, the one damaged in the earthquake of '33. Joachim says it came from the same quarry as the Nymph. Perhaps it holds memories too." The weight of it felt right in Antonio's hand, solid, real,
carrying the peculiar warmth that marble absorbs from human touch. He would carry it to his next commission, a cathedral in Braga, where saints needed their faces restored, where different mysteries would require different interpretations. As the carriage prepared to depart, the household assembled in that informal way that suggests genuine rather than obligatory farewell. The nymph stood visible in the background, dry today, but patient for her next performance. Dom Rodrigo, leaning heavily on his cane but insisting on standing, spoke loudly enough for all to hear.
Senor Silva came to restore our statues, but he's restored something more valuable: the ability to see our world with both wonder and wisdom. The garden is richer for his work, and we are richer for his presence. Antonio bowed, feeling the formal moment required formal response. The Quinta das Lágrimas has taught me that mysteries don't diminish with understanding. They deepen. Your nymph will continue weeping, and whether observers see miracle or mechanism, both will be correct. As the carriage began to move, Antonio caught a last glimpse of the garden through morning light. The statues stood in their eternal poses, gods and goddesses, muses and nymphs, all holding their silence and their secrets. Moreau's hidden channels continued their underground circulation, water moving through darkness toward light, preparing perhaps for the next convergence that would make marble weep. 3 months later, in Braga, Antonio received a letter from Isabel.
The professor from the academy had come and gone, fascinated by her notebooks, speaking of publishing her observations in their journal, though under a masculine pseudonym, naturally. The nymph had wept on Santo Antonio's feast day, exactly as Joaquim predicted. Dom Rodrigo's health had improved enough for him to walk the garden daily. Beatrice had become engaged to the journalist, scandalizing and delighting society in equal measure. But the most interesting news came in a postscript. Silvestre has discovered another statue that responds to weather, the Diana near the eastern wall. She doesn't weep, but seems to sing before windstorms, a high, thin sound, like breath through reeds. We're documenting it carefully, using both old wisdom and new method. The garden, it seems, has more conversations than we imagined. Antonio smiled, touching the piece of smooth marble in his pocket. Every place held its mysteries, its convergences of nature and craft, intention and accident. His work in Braga progressed well, the saints' faces emerging from damaged stone like memories returning after long absence. The cathedral held its own mysteries, stones that hummed during certain prayers, windows that cast colors that didn't match their glass, acoustic properties that made whispers carry to impossible distances. He'd learned from the Quinta das Lágrimas that explanation didn't diminish wonder, it simply moved it to a different location. The real mystery wasn't how the nymph wept, but that humans needed her tears, found meaning in marble's response to moisture, built entire philosophies around stone's conversation with weather. Years later, when Antonio's hair had gone gray and his shoulder pain had become his most reliable companion, he would still carry that piece of marble from the old fountain. Sometimes, holding it, he could feel the Portuguese sun warming marble, could hear Joaquim's certainty and Isabel's questions, could see the garden breathing through its hidden channels. The nymph, he knew, still wept before storms. New generations gathered to witness her tears, some seeing miracle, some seeing science, most seeing simply beauty in the predictable made mysterious. Silvestre, grown into his role as head gardener, would teach apprentices both languages of understanding, showing them how to read clouds and barometers, how to trust ancient wisdom and modern instruments equally. And somewhere, in libraries and academies, Isabel's observations, published finally under her own name after years of argument, would teach students that science lives everywhere, practiced by anyone willing to observe carefully, to document faithfully, to question respectfully.
The marble in Antonio's pocket warmed to his touch. Holding heat-like memories hold meaning, imperfectly but persistently, transforming common minerals into something that endures beyond its making. This too was a kind of weeping, he thought. The way stone releases what it has absorbed, the way stories seep from silence, the way truth and mystery dance their eternal waltz through gardens where patient nymphs wait for the precise conditions that will make them cry. In the end, dear listener, perhaps all mysteries are like the weeping nymph, natural phenomena dressed in wonders' clothing, reminding us that understanding how something works doesn't explain why we need it to be beautiful. The garden at Quinta das Lágrimas continues its conversations between earth and sky, stone and flesh, the known and the imagined.
And somewhere, marble still weeps when conditions align, indifferent to whether its tears spring from miracle or mechanism, continuing its ancient dialogue with those who pause to listen.